Go to mute one. The Patreon. There we go. Can you hear me now? Sorry, trying to have all the different live streams set up. Hey, here I am. This is my daily devotions with Daniela, and I sit here and I make content. I don't usually post at all. I'm just posting this one. So yeah, we're gonna do that. Pretty white wing, and pretty right wing, and then something turned you progressive. Who said something about lowering standards? Oh, I'm gonna jump on this. Bob the fish. No, I don't feel like I have to lower my standards for other races. I do feel like you thinking that saying inclusion means lowering your standards for other races is your white supremacy and your programming. In fact, I was a part of when Washington State voted down affirmative action. I was a part of the opposition. And the people that voted down affirmative action, by the way, they hired the Proud Boys to do their security back before the Proud Boys were nationally known. And they got the messaging that, oh, this is against veterans. If you make it equal for everyone, it's against veterans. Part of my job is to just get up on these stages and be like, imagine how surprised these people are to find out that there are brown and black veterans and women veterans. They're very surprised because they only think of the white, tall veterans that look like my husband. But yeah, when people go, oh, you want equality? Ooh, what about the draft? You're just telling on yourself that you're a misogynist that thinks women are automatically worse at war. And when you say someone gets a job, someone who's not a straight white man gets a job, and you say, oh, so you're lowering your standards now? You're just showing your embedded supremacy and bigotry. Because why? Why do you think it's lowering of standards? It's a very similar way to push back when cult recruiters are like, your friends and your family are never going to understand this. I just like to look at them and be like, why? What are you saying about my friends and family? Why are you calling my people stupid? I never know what to say with that. But yes, you are proving that you think people are subhuman when you do that. A really interesting one was when Justin Trudeau created his cabinet. Just make a video about this, by the way. Oops, get out of TikTok. It's very interesting when you talk about deconstructing the myth of white supremacy, or really just deconstructing anything, and people's first reaction is, oh, so you're saying we should lower our standards? And I love to just gently push back on that and be like, why? Why, straight white man, do you think that saying equality means lowering standards? Tell me, please. Please explain it to me. Yeah, exactly. You just don't like that there's going to be competition and that you're going to have to compete about everyone. When people get upset like this, when people say, oh, women, you want to be equal? What about the draft? Or, oh, you want to be equal? Well, what about lowering standards? You're just saying that the myth of white supremacy has so embedded in your head that you truly believe you were supposed to be on top. You believed that you were supposed to be on top. You believed that you, straight white man, were supposed to be handed a job. And now that it's, quote, being handed to other people, according to you, you need to throw a fit about that. But it was really, really interesting when Justin Trudeau appointed his cabinet. So when Justin Trudeau of Canada appointed his cabinet, it was lauded at the time as the most representative cabinet, I think, in the world, but certainly that Canada had ever had. And so, of course, immediately the straight white men started with the, oh, well, was it the best person for every job? And here's what I have to say as a group behavior scholar. What makes you think that the most representative group isn't the best group for every job? Even if your prejudice is right and only straight white men are the ones that can do anything, even if that prejudice is right, what makes you think that by lowering your standards, you're not getting the best team in the first place? Exactly. Need to make a video about my collar. I've made another Descent collar. I'm so in love with this one. So, okay, first of all, I got this bag of yarn at a thrift store. Oh my gosh, it's probably $300 of alpaca yarn, this yellow yarn. And I was taking something out that was half done and it had this really cool pattern knitted already. So I'm like, I'm going to turn that into a collar. Then I had this other thing that had a bunch of, it was a different necklace, but it was ruined. So I took it apart. I strung the yellow thing onto this, and then I just started adding crazy yarns. And then I pulled up another bag of beads that I had. And when my husband was in Kenya last year, he got me this necklace, but it had broken recently. So I put these like super lovely, authentic amber beads. And of course, we got to have a cuff. Anyways, these are my Descent collars, and I came up with the Descent collar when I was dealing with my own journey to find my identity, which we all have to deal with after we leave cults and high control groups, because your number one job in a high control group is not to be an individual. So I was on a journey to build my own identity, because the cool thing is once we can name something in language, once we can be like, oh, I wasn't allowed to have an identity, we can then go out and discover one. So I'm dealing with the fact that I grew up in Brazil and Mexico, and there's absolutely nothing Mexican about me, except for the fact that I lived in Mexico from the very significant ages of 14 and 15 years old. So I was trying to find different pieces, and this has actually been one of the beautiful things for me about all of the crafting that I do, is that I'm not from anywhere. So what I don't want to be is like a white woman that looks like she's appropriating all of these cultures, but I actually am from different pieces of different cultures, and I'm not from anywhere, specifically not American cultures. I have a friend who grew up in Hare Krishnas, and it's even, she just looks like a white, redheaded walking tale of cultural appropriation, but she's from India. She was born and raised her whole life in India, and she dresses like she's from India. So I was on this journey to discover myself and all the parts, and I found this necklace that the original pattern is this Mexican-inspired traditional collar, and I started making them and adapting them for myself, and I really love them. And so I call the collar is called the Descent collar. Little nod to RBG, but just also the fact that like in cults, you're not supposed to be unique. You're not supposed to stand out. You are not supposed to ever do anything that makes you look not uniform. And so these collars, you'll never blend in again. And the cuffs, we call them the exit cost cuffs, because, reminds us of how far we've come and what all we paid. Okay. Mods, is someone getting rid of Jim? Thanks. He's not playing nicely. But just while people are getting concerned about the draft, like we have a giant standing military, which we did not have during our last two drafts. So the draft will, by the time we have another draft, we are in a serious ground war with China or Russia or something like that. And none of y'all are complaining about girls being involved or using it as a threat. But I get asked what I think about a draft a lot. And First of all, it's not a threat to women when you say, "Oh, you want equality? Then you want the draft." It's fun to just look at people and be like, "Why do you think I would automatically be worse at war or more scared?" But as a group behavior scholar, I'm Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. What I have to say is that an army, a volunteer army, the one we have today, is definitely more culty, right? When we join the military, we go through programming, and all you really need to break someone down is three things: violence, isolation, and small acts of kindness. And in the military, they do this, of course, in extreme ways. The violence mostly being what you are made to cause to yourself, with all of the forced working out. And so we can break you down, we can build you back up. That the process of that happening is called identity breaking indoctrination. And this is what cults do. So when we go through that, it has a lot of impacts on our identities. Now, the thing that I have discovered that I, as my cult baby raised cult scholar, am putting into the world is that as adults, we buy into our own indoctrination, right? So when I was a kid in the Children of God cult, which you can get autographed books of linked here, you could, when I was a kid in the cult, there was nothing that you could do to make me believe in it. And trust me, they tried. It wasn't logical. I wasn't doing it. Little children cannot be brainwashed or indoctrinated or programmed or whatever you want to call it in the same way as adults, because we just don't have that level of rational thinking yet to see the red flag, create an excuse for it, and then barge past it. Right. So what happens to children when they are isolated and raised with only one closed off belief, that is called mind rape. That is very different. But with adults, we buy into our own indoctrination. So I cannot be persuaded that the Children of God is legit. I don't know why I keep picking it up when I'm wearing the thing right here. But as soon as I join the army, I am the first one to be like, you signed up for this, Daniela, right? Anytime anything is hard or weird or stupid, you push yourself past it. And that, by the way, there's research that shows that once we do the first irrational thing for our group, we are very, very likely to do more and to not complain at being asked to do more. Right. So this is all an important part of indoctrinating you. This is also why it's very, very hard to break somebody's brainwashing, because we buy into our own indoctrination. So when we look at like the Vietnam Army, by definition, less culty than the post 9/11 Army, because people have not bought in. You can force them to go to war, but you cannot force them to buy in, which makes it much less culty. And so I say all the time, like, a draft doesn't scare me. The serious ground war with Russia or China or North Korea that we would be in would scare me. But it would be very cool as a military veteran, former military planning officer and scholar of the military. It would be very, very cool for me to see like what a group of 18-year-old women that did not want to be in the military would innovate. That would be fascinating to me. Got some to learn to knit. Yeah, you should definitely try it. Everybody's knitting now, even Michelle Obama. It's so good for trauma. It's so good for brain development because it's something that uses both sides of your brain. And I will tell you that the biggest stereotype everybody has is that you're counting all of the time. This is one of the reasons people are blown away by my knitting, I think, because they're seeing me carry on a full conversation, knit super, super fast, and also be counting the whole time. And everybody's like, what? How? But actually, you're not counting, only in the beginning when you're learning. But make a video of this one. So one of my favorite knitting facts of all times is that knitting was a pretty reliable way for the Allies to get messages across and through German lines. Why, do you ask? Well, there's two relevant things here. So first of all, in World War II, you pretty much have knitting as a language that is read only by women. Right? So knitting patterns are written in a code You have to know what that code means. It's not incredibly difficult, but you still have to know what it means, right? So you already have something that like you can have this be a spy message, and a guard is going to look at it, if they even look at it, and go, oh, it's gibberish, but that's not weird because I don't knit. But the bigger thing was the male tendency to underestimate any woman engaged in woman's work. Because here I am, right? Riding the train with my knitting basket, knitting with 2 or 3 patterns in there. And they can search me and they can find it. What they don't realize when they're like, oh, it's just a woman with her knitting. What they don't realize is I don't need a pattern. This is just spy information. This is why, former intelligence officer, I will tell you that the thing that hurts you the most is what you don't know, you don't know. So like Pearl Harbor is always shown in the media as an intelligence failure, as everything is. But it's shown that the intelligence failure was that they lost the Japanese fleet. The actual intelligence failure is that they didn't realize that Japan had the capability to reach Hawaii. You don't know what you don't know. The only way you find out what you don't know is by getting a lot of different perspectives around you and giving them the right to speak and listening to them, or when it blows up in your face. That is called the dark quadrant of intelligence. Yes, they would be invaded. Like bedazzled tanks rolling down the hill. Love it. Okay. I just made the tie for my daughter's dress. This was originally going to be my dress, but it turned into my kid's dress. I took a shirt and I put the collar right on the shirt. We're going to make it a dress so that she can wear it when she gets home. And I always get angry about making my kid stuff because she doesn't wear it. She probably won't wear this one. But look, oh, I'm making a baby scarf again. Look how cute it's going to be with its yellow puffy sleeves. Okay. Having a hard time seeing the YouTube comments. Have I heard of any military structures that score low on the cult spectrum? No, I haven't. Here's my whole theory about the military. Hang on, I have to. Oh, I don't have time to set that up, so I'm just going to knit this one. So let's talk about the military being a cult or being culty. So as Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extreme bad leadership, I have written a book, Uncultured, that compares a cult, Children of God, to the military. You can get that signed here or anywhere you buy books, including on audio. And so people all the time are like, well, do you think the military is really a cult? So yes, but my actual scholarly argument is that when we deploy a unit to training or warfare, they are going to have a cult experience. So anytime the military is billeting you, anytime the military is telling you where to sleep, you are going to have a cult experience. This is when like all 10 of my cult things are activated. A lot of the time when you're back home, I don't think all of them are activated. Specifically things like us versus them mentality, for example, when high exit costs. I mean, still high exit costs, but when you deploy, you're getting out of there by serious injury, death, or ending your career. Those are high exit costs. So I think when any unit deploys, they're going to have a cultic experience. And I think that this really tells us a lot about soldier issues like suicide, like rape culture, like the depression we experience, like how crazy it is to take people from a year in a cult and just throw them back to their families, but then meet up with them every day for 7 days and tell them not to kill everybody. But in addition to like the cultic experience that you're going to have if you deploy, there are also 4 or 5 things that everyone goes through when they enter the military, which is 1, you sign a black and white contract. You do not get to negotiate. You are signing away your life. And they're allowed to lie to you. They're allowed to pull this bait and switch that is the basic of a cult. And it usually happens. When they're recruiting you, it's all about you. It's all about what the branch of the military can do for you. The second they've got you, you get to basic training and they tell you straight up, we don't care what your recruiter said. You're ours now. Okay, so you sign a black and white contract. Then you go through identity breaking indoctrination. Incidentally enough, almost everybody goes through this, but at least in the US Army, the lawyers, the doctors, and very, very importantly, the psychologists do not go through identity breaking indoctrination. Why do I think that's important? Because I think in 2024, if a psychologist went through military basic training, they would have to change it because there is no do no harm version of do no harm that you could hide yourself behind. So you have identity breaking indoctrination that happens in complete isolation. Then you have a culture of shut up and sit down, lieutenant, or a new guy. So not listening to the new people that come in. This means you are in a closed system and you are siloed. You are, what do we call it? Separated from the world. That's right. There's one more thing here that I can't remember. I always forget. And then there's the culture that is go sit in that corner and don't poison the soldiers with your ideas of the free world out there. When you decide to get out, there's this culture that I think is tantamount to shunning. So these are the different things. I think the fourth thing is just like the being inside a total institution and the way that group norms work. So total institution is something that scholars came up with because we can't call everything a cult. So we look at things like the military, mental hospitals, Downton Abbey, British royal family, nunneries, etc., as being total institutions. So a total institution is where you live and work with like-situated people removed from the rest of the world with some sort of formal round of life. And in total institutions, group norms are so much stronger than they are even amongst the regular population, where they are still very strong. And this is why, so like a lot of people will say, oh, it's not a cult. We don't have a uniform, but it's not uniform. It's uniform appearance and uniform acting, because your number one job in any total institution is not to stand out. This is one of the things that makes it very, very difficult for women in the military, because we stand out from day one. And in a total institution, the other becomes the enemy very quickly. In the US Army, our job is to find, fix, and finish the enemy. So we see the problem. Yeah, kids never wear the things you make. Figuring out your identity, being raised in a mine. Yeah. Isolating system. Advice on the identity journey. I do have advice. The question was, do I have advice on the journey of finding your own identity after growing up in a cult or a cult-like system or a narcissistic family or being in an abusive relationship that you've had your identity stripped from you? And I do. I have so many tips. I'm Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God and then going into the US Army. You can get autographed copies. So my first thing is just understanding, like saying the phrase out loud, oh, I didn't get to form a personal identity. Right? What we're supposed to be doing from the years of 1 to 6 really heavily is establishing our personal identity. And then all the way through the age of 25, right, is our brain and our personality and identity still being formed. So in any of those years, if we are in situations, can be a total institution like the military, where your number one job is not to stand out, that means you are being asked to suppress your individuality in favor of the group. Maybe this is not always a negative thing, but I think it always has an impact on our identities. So one of my first things is just, figure that out for yourself, right? In words, be like, oh, I need to go figure out my identity. My second tip is thrift stores. Because when you go to buy anything anywhere in America, you are being marketed to about what you are supposed to want. But when you go to a thrift store, nobody's telling you that, right? Like you just have to walk up to a rainbow blazer and be like, do I love this or do I hate this? And that is a really good exercise. Okay. And so then my second tip, this is very convenient because you're already in a thrift store, is wear wacky outfits, right? This is part of why we make the Descent collar for those that don't have the necessarily wherewithal to go create their own wacky outfits. But really, when you dress in a way that shows you're not playing this game, right? So you're not trying to fit in, you're not trying to disappear. You have your own personality, but also just doing something wacky because you want to, because you are the adult of your own life. I remember when my child was 3 and I was buying them clothes at the thrift store and being like, why would you even have normal clothes as a toddler? Like I would just only have princess dresses and other outfits because it's not like you need to go to work today. And so interestingly enough, when I got my life-changing book deal and my first taste of like freedom from having to trade my time for money, my very first thought was, I'm going to wear whatever I want for the rest of my life. And somebody says it's difficult when it isn't safe to stand out. That is true as well, right? So I always, when I talk about this, want to acknowledge my privilege of being, it's relatively safe for me to stand out. And so maybe you can't do like the wackiest, craziest things, but there's probably something we can do that doesn't really make sense, right? The same way that during identity breaking indoctrination for a cult, when the group is trying to get you to bond to the group, they have you do wacky rituals or wacky outfits or say wacky things or chant in tongues because they're trying to get you to just let yourself go and just like fall into those group norms and realize that you just have to play the game. You just have to drink the Kool-Aid. So when you're coming out of that, right, you can reverse engineer that. So example is like the episode of Friends where Phoebe's running like this all crazy. Like, go do that, right? Like, what can you do that is wacky in public? Go to a park and sing out loud. And again, yes, you have to have the privilege. You have to find the place where you are safe to be wacky. But there's probably something you can do in your life to help yourself stand out as an individual. And then a final thing is read books, and specifically coming of age books, right? So when we were raised in cults or high control groups, we most likely did not get to have like a regular coming of age, especially if you were in a situation that was physically or sexually abusing you. So for me, it's witch books. And I just love, these like YA books. There's one I'm listening to now called, oh God, is it Spellcraft or Spellbound? Oh, I'll have to make its own video because I'm an influencer now that's supposed to be talking about these things. But just having these vicarious moments of growing up and being an individual and just getting to like ask crazy teenage questions or have that excitement of your first kiss that maybe you didn't get to have because it was taken from you. These can all be like really important things of developing our identities. Are you waiting for me?
Mm-hmm. What time are you planning on using the car?
I need to go to the post office at some point, so just before you go. Or when you get back.
Okay. I'm gonna head up to. I'm gonna start building my me project for Father's Day camping.
Okay. Love you.
Good.
He's wearing one of my t-shirts that says UMD is my favorite cult. Nothing. Talking to my people.
Uh,
Someone over here is saying mismatched socks. That's a good one. That's when you see a lot of men doing when they're in jobs where they still have to be in their suits and stuff, is they just wear crazy socks. What else we got over here? Is whiteness about assimilation? 100%. Just got asked an excellent question. Is whiteness about assimilation? Absolutely so. I'm Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, always deconstructing something. And in many cases, it's the myth of white supremacy. Soon to be launching a podcast with White Woman Whisperer called Hey White Woman, where we just talk about all of this stuff. But even when we look at cults, one of the things that we see is a lot of white people seem to be very into the cult-like groups. People always want to come up with, oh, what about Jonestown? Only time white people mention the black people in Jonestown is when I talk about white people joining cults. But we can just say, look at MLMs. Just look at commercial cults. Who joins those? So this is exactly about the fact that not us, but our ancestors at some point gave up their individual identities for whiteness, right? And so, this is one of the things where the stuff I'm deconstructing from the cult, I think a lot of times all white America needs to deconstruct. It just seems a little bit less obvious. But, my family is 2 generations removed from being Slovakian, living in Slovakia. And we didn't get any of that. I grew up in Brazil and got pieces of that culture, but I didn't get any kind of Slovakian, Hungarian culture. And as I'm deconstructing my own cult experience, trying to find my own identity, that's another thing that I'm looking at. It's like, how can I get back to that? And it's not as simple as just being like, oh, I'm Slovakian, right? Because then I'm like appropriating that culture too. But, I've heard definitely Black women creators say, like, stop calling yourself a white person, call yourself a European American or a Slovakian Hungarian American, because white is not a thing. And, we tend to have this default that we don't think of white as a race. And of course it is. But one of the reasons I think that America has fallen so bad into the Culting of America book I'm working on right now, followed by Australia, another country of displaced white people that don't have community, is because we really don't have that. We really don't know how to do community in a healthy way because of what we've given, right? Trying to stay on top of a toxic system is a toxic thing, and it's not going to end up good for us. So deconstructing the myth of white supremacy, I think, is something that we all need to be about right now. And as ever, we did not create the system, but we do benefit from it. So it is important that we take the time to deconstruct it, figure out how we can give some of that white privilege back. Race is a social construct, but it is a example of something made up that has become very much real in our society. Another example of this is gasoline and internet. So it used to be that human beings only needed 3 things to survive: food, water, and shelter. Then fuel became one of the things human beings need to survive. Absolutely not necessary for a human being's actual survival, but because of the societies and the groups and systems that we built, fuel became the 4th thing we needed to survive, and then internet. And when I was in spy school 15 years ago, that's Army Intelligence School, our largest disaster in the world before nuclear war was the internet going down. And we saw a version of this in Puerto Rico, where the internet went down for about a week and over 3,000 people were killed. If the internet goes down for up to a month, it would be war. It would be war within a few weeks. And it doesn't take much. Back then they used to say 30 guys working for 30 minutes to take the internet down. So these are all things that we have created in our groups and systems that are necessary for our survival, except, yeah. Didn't even record that one. Okay. Now I need to start the actual reading part of devotions. Oh. Hey, I was looking for this crochet hook. Apparently I was using it as a bookmark. I'm reading right now When the World Didn't End by Guinevere Turner. We are discussing this in my start the video. Today for Devotions with Daniela, we are reading from When the World Didn't End by Guinevere Turner. This is her book about growing up in a cult called the Lyman family, which was kind of an individual cult. It wasn't just a single family. It grew to encompass a lot of people. But half of the group is being out of the cult. And one of the things that really stands out to me about her narrative is that we look at the cult and blame it for a lot of things when we grew up. But a lot of times the truth is our parents would have been those kinds of people. The cult just gave them the ability to live their own personalities out in the open. And especially with the, I always describe having a cult baby childhood as a mix of overly controlling and overly neglectful at the same time. I'm just going to answer this question over here. Why does the internet going down kill people? Well, you probably don't get paid in cash, buy stuff straight from a farmer, pump your own water. We just start with those three. Everything you do on a daily basis now is connected to the internet. And most importantly, style. There's only enough beer in the stores to last one day. So, but yeah, I mean, everything, right? Most people can't walk to work. Most people don't get paid in cash. Most people don't grow their own food or pump their own water or know people who do. So the way you get every single life supporting service these days is through the internet. And this is the way that societies work, is that we create these innovations and we don't actually know if they're good or bad for us till it's already too late. So there's all this writing about wheat and how the cultivation of wheat on every scale made human beings less happy. But by the time we figured that out, human beings survive on wheat. So, okay, sorry, I'm going back to the reading. Chapter 41. A few days later, my suitcase was loaded in the back of FP's Suburban, and he was driving me to live at Granny's house. Oh, this is so good, because he was abusing her so badly. Before I'd come home from Claire's, I'd steeled myself for the same old hamster wheel of bullshit. And even though I thought I might make some demands, though I wasn't really sure if I would, because what could those demands possibly be? I'd long ago stopped wanting things to change. I knew they wouldn't, except maybe to get worse. And what was worse? One or both of them going to prison sounded like an improvement to me. So what was there to salvage? Claire's mother had given me a ride home, and as I stared out of the window of her car, I felt the familiar numbness creep over me. I scared them, I thought. At least I scared them. And then I didn't even care about that because I was just so tired. This is an interesting part of her book that I relate to so well. First of all, she was taken out of the cult against her will. And she actually, for the most part, liked it. And so she was really upset about that and then had to go live in this horrible situation with her mother and an abuser. And she's been trying to leave. The part that I really relate to is not being able to leave because you don't want to break your parents' hearts. This is really heartbreaking to me, I think, because they're the ones choosing to shun us if we don't live the way they want us to live. But to us, it always feels like we're the bad kid. We're the one deciding to go. We're the one breaking their heart. And so she finally hit her thing where she was mad enough and she now wants to hurt them. And that's going to be her way out. I'd thanked Claire's mom and come inside the house and into the kitchen, where my mother didn't say anything, only gave me a dramatic hug that made me feel nothing. FP stood nearby, arms calmly folded, but something about the tension around his mouth told me he was either furious or sad. Whatever, they both looked like they hadn't slept all night, and I was happy about that. Of course, FP started in, at first saying, "Your mother and I talked it over last night, and we think it's best if you go live with Granny." His tone was so laughably earnest, I almost missed what he was saying. What after-school special was he in where he talked things over with my mother? He blathered on, wandering in and out of wisdoms about how my mother and I clearly weren't getting along, that it was obvious I wasn't happy, and I don't know what else he said, except it ended with him screaming, "You want to get away from here so bad? Good. You're going. You got your wish. I hope you can live with yourself." My mother was crying at this point, but neither of us had said a word for 20 minutes. And now here we were in his car on the way to my grandmother's house. FP was upbeat, smoking and babbling about how this was a good idea, and it was really his idea, and how Granny wasn't so happy about it at first, but he'd talked her into it. What the fuck had he said to her? I knew whatever he said couldn't possibly be the truth, which meant I'd probably been spun as a difficult teenager or some other nonsense. But I didn't care. My night on the Appalachian Trail, even if brief, had worked. I'd shaken something loose, finally. They weren't scared of me exactly, but I hoped it meant they were starting to see there was no way they could keep me caged forever. I feel like this is a really important moment in the lives of children that grew up in cults under this mind rape of being separated from the world and only given one option to believe in, is this very specific coming of age, often right around 15, at least it was for me and for Guinevere, of just being like, I'm done. I want out. Doesn't matter what I'm going to have to do to survive. I don't want to be here. I think there's an interesting thing of cults where we at first think the problem is us, right? Like, I don't fit here. So for me and the Children of God, the family, it was just like, I don't want to be in the family. At some point, though, we realize that the problem is not us. The problem is the group. And at that point, I think we lose the caring, and we lose the part of us that wanted to try so hard to change ourselves and be good and fit in. And if our parents are going to care about that system more than they're going to care about us, we're going to forsake our parents too, unfortunately. As he rambled on, I was in the familiar state of simply getting past him to the next thing, barely listening but nodding occasionally so he wouldn't explode out of nowhere, which was easy because the next thing was so unimaginably great. We were half an hour away from Dover, a knowable amount of time, at the end of which I would no longer have to hear his voice. I was reveling in the fact that he was inches from me in the driver's seat, but would maybe never be that close to me again. I was busy hating his smell, in my mind tolerating it for the last time. Coffee from a Folgers can, which my mother made him every morning, ritualistically drinking a cup herself with her eyes full of fear. Lucky Strikes, but only because he wanted to be like the guys in the family. Jeans that reeked of not being washed enough, the smell of dampness and paint wafting my way. It was nauseating because it was so familiar. But I thought, as I sat there in his passenger seat, he also smelled like ivory soap, which was what we all smelled like because it was the only soap we had in the house. I never understood the commercial about it floating. What floats? Ivory soap floats. Who cared if it could float? I knew that Granny had Dove soap in her bathroom, and once I got there, I would be happy not to have that particular smell in common with him anymore. I was pulled out of this reverie about soap when he said, "But I promised to come visit you." Oh, there it was. Of course he wasn't going to leave me alone. He always had an angle. "We're not just going to abandon you with Granny," he chuckled. Crazy old lady. But he was speaking about some vague future, and this was now, where I had a new life. He dropped me off at Granny's, and after requisite pleasantries that chilled me, eventually he drove away. And there I was on her steps again with my suitcases. But unlike last time, it felt like a safe place. Thank God for Granny, I thought, as we walked up her steps together and Dennis took my bags. She did her usual grumbling. I'd learned she didn't like things to be different. But something about the way she looked at the car when FP drove away told me that she knew more than she would ever let on. Or maybe that she just didn't like him and had her own experiences with charmers who ended up being no good. And she's out of the cult. Something about 15. I think there's a lot of us who realize we're not going to make it to 18. And that's hard. Oh, so more questions about the internet. Yes, not getting your salary. Gas stations absolutely using everything uses the internet to resupply. So every single thing that you need to survive stops getting to where you buy it from when the internet goes down. Everything's interconnected. There's actually a really funny story. Some cop told us in some counterintelligence course or whatever, but essentially the reason you can't be a blatant racist is those are federal laws. And so somebody who had a business that he was sure, it was a restaurant, that he was only in one state, nothing went out of state, everything was locally sourced. And so he figured he could be just as racist as he wanted, and he did. And eventually they got him because of sweet and low packets, because his sweet and low packets were bought from outside the state. And so he got to go to jail for a long time, which makes me very happy. And yes, universal broadband is very important for the whole nation. I mean, during COVID, it was horrible. Children having to go like sit in the parking lots of McDonald's to get their homework done because it's so important. I'm trying to figure out how. My setup's not the best, so YouTube people just have to see Alice on the back of my tablet. I don't know what you want me to talk about the academies. They're super culty. I don't know why anyone would go spend 4 years in identity breaking indoctrination prison of a academy, but in fact, the reason that they do it is because it's a very good step up to the upper class. It's one of the reasons that rich people still send their children to the academies. All right. Yeah. So the question is, a lot of religious organizations and people away on proselytizing missions say the experience will make them good orators, good salespeople, strong personalities, righteous people. Thoughts? The Mormons will specifically tell the missionaries that your most important comfort is yourself. They often hold their passports. And if anyone is holding your passport, and you are a human capable of safeguarding your own passport, they are trafficking you. That is in the international definition of trafficking. Yes, I do think that they sell all of these things as skills that you're going to develop. And the interesting part is it's true, right? I mean, I make my living now performing for people, and I am very good at it because I grew up in a cult. I was one of the reasons I passed school. Everyone, in my book, it's like we're completely denied an education. And then I get out of the cult and I didn't pass 22 tests. Couldn't fake my way through the math and science, but I could definitely fake my way through the histories and the literatures and the arts. And my policy when I didn't know an essay question was just write 3 more paragraphs. And so being raised in cults and being essentially trafficked in labor since you were born, yeah, you're good at, I've always been better than someone my age at manipulating the English language and at reading people above me and telling them what they want to hear, because that was my basic life skill that I had to have to get me through. It is also true that government organizations and the military really, really love children who grew up in high control religions, or children, that were just missionaries abroad, because it tells them that you probably speak several languages, you know how to get around in another country without drawing all of the attention to yourself, you know how to interact with people that are different from you. These are all going to be things that are important in the kinds of government jobs that you go into. And it's one of the weird things, because people feel like they either have to only get the benefits, like, oh, I can't say that mission was labor trafficking, because then what about all the benefits that I got from it? But I think actually the reality is, once you deconstruct these things, then you're free to talk about all the benefits, right? Like, I'm trilingual. This has benefited me in every single job of my life, because my bosses always assume that I'm a genius, even though I've never actually had to use any of those languages. But I mean, I went to Brazil and I did a talk for the Brazilian military intelligence community in Portuguese, and it was really cool. There's all kinds of skills that I have learned that have helped me throughout my life and my career. I was much more successful in the Army because I was raised in a cult. And once you deconstruct things, you can like pull those good things back into your life. You can be like, yes, all of these things that came out of it were good. Still probably shouldn't have been in, isolation and getting raped my whole life by grown-ups. Like, still don't think that was a good trade-off for the skills that I learned. Someone said something here. Oh yeah, I did not grow up Mormon. I describe Children of God as he took evangelical Christianity, poured a bunch of Mormonism on top of it, and then flipped it. And that was us. I grew up in absolute pedophile culture, which is the other side of pedophilia, or is the other side of purity culture. By the other side, I mean it's the same thing. It's still the sexual obsession with children. Okay. Ooh, we're going to read about the glass cliff. I need to back this up a little bit. I'm just taking photos of myself. Today for Devotions with Daniela, we are reading from Mediocre by Ijoma Oluo. Today for Devotions with Daniela, we are reading from Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America by Ijoma Oluo. My book stand. Can we do it? Women only as a last resort, and then not really, pushed off the glass cliff. When the New York Times announced in the summer of 2011 that Jill Abramson would become the next executive director of the nation's paper of record, few people were surprised. She had been established as the heir apparent in her previous role as its managing editor, and after scandals involving white male executive editors and struggles to adapt to a digital news world, Abramson represented both the change and the stability that the Times needed. Usually, when the person everyone knows is going to get the job gets the job, it doesn't make headlines. But Abramson's promotion was widely talked about and celebrated. Why? Because the Gray Lady had managed to operate for over 150 years without a single woman at its helm. You'd think the New York Times would be embarrassed that it took so long to place one of its many talented women in charge. You'd think the paper would have gotten to it at some point in the 35 and counting years since it was sued by multiple women employees for harassment and discrimination. But instead of the promotion being viewed as underscoring the sexist legacy of the paper, The Times was celebrated for taking only 16 decades to decide that a woman could lead it. And when you look back over the last few hundred years at how other companies have treated women, it makes sense that Abramson was regarded as a unicorn instead of as a hardworking, competent, and highly qualified employee, earning a well-deserved promotion. Although no American company in this era can be openly against women workers without facing customer backlash and major lawsuits, women in general haven't enjoyed the extraordinary gains in the workplace that those who were fighting for the right to work in the 1940s hoped for. Women are still paid significantly less than white men. Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic women barely earn half of what white men make. Surveys show that between 30 and 80% of women report having been sexually harassed in the workplace. Most women still work at companies that don't provide daycare assistance or adequate family leave to care for sick children. This country's average maternity leave programs are an embarrassment when compared to those in most European countries. In Brazil, you get 5 months off paid. In Washington, my home state, new parents are guaranteed only 12 weeks of paid leave following the birth or adoption of a child. Oh, I had a child in Washington state and I got 0 days of paid leave. In Sweden, new parents are given 16 months of paid leave. I know these truths personally. I remember tearfully leaving my son at daycare for 9 hours a day, just 4 weeks after he was born, because I couldn't live on the 50% maternity pay my company offered. I remember pumping breast milk in a supply closet in the women's restroom because there were no sanitary or private accommodations offered. Outside of one brief stint at a woman's clothing store in my early 20s, I have not worked at a company where I wasn't sexually harassed by a manager or coworker. I've been groped, kissed, propositioned, all without invitation or consent. I've been passed over for promotions because I wasn't strong enough to lead, and uninvited from meetings because I was too opinionated. And I've watched the same things and much worse happen to countless women friends and colleagues over the decades. Even though there are more women in the workplace than ever before, even though women are now more likely than men to get a college degree, and even though we can look up just about any corporate values statement and see something about gender equality written there, workplaces across the country are still, by and large, anti-woman. American business today is still a world run by and for white men. Women are ignored at best, treated like hostile intruders or sex objects at worst. After many decades of struggle, we are still so far away from gender equity that we can't even see it. In 2019, women made up just 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs. 5%. And yet women make up a little more than half the overall population. We find dudes named John at the heads of top companies more than women, or more dudes named John. So when Jill Abramson was promoted to executive editor of the New York Times, it was, sadly, a big deal. Many, myself included, took Abramson's promotion as a sign of positive change in the publishing world. And when she was publicly and abruptly fired just 2 years later, many of us realized that maybe she and the rest of us had been set up. When you can't keep women out anymore and you can't force them all to become secretaries or teachers because modern social politics demand that you at least pretend to support gender equality in the workplace, what can you do to keep women out of powerful positions in business? You can set them up to fail, or to be more accurate, you set them up to fall. It's called the glass cliff, and it's a phrase that was first coined in 2005 by University of Exeter researchers Michelle K. Ryan and S. Alexander Haslam. Their research was inspired by an article in the Times of London, not New York, that suggested women leaders have a negative impact on stock performance. Perhaps Ryan and Haslam smelled the whiff of bullshit coming from the page. They wondered if it was actually true that women brought doom and gloom to the businesses they led, or if there was some other reason why women were more likely to be found in leadership positions at troubled businesses. They found that women were indeed more likely than men to be in leadership positions at distressed companies, but they also found that the problems were not the women's fault. In researching the 100 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange that the Times had reviewed for its article, They found that although women were vastly underrepresented on boards, they were most likely to be added to the boards of companies that were in serious trouble. These firms had showed months of decline and seemed at risk of failure prior to adding the women to their boards. And this is kind of important. We see this in cults too. People are always asking me like why there are so many more male cult leaders than women cult leaders. And first of all, I just think it's because coercive control just plots right along the line of patriarchy. And so women just have to work so much harder to get there and to stay there. And then when they do, we celebrate their fall so much more, like Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos or Marissa Mayer of Yahoo. When Allison Cook and Christy Glass at Utah State University followed up on this research by looking at US companies, they also discovered disturbing patterns impacting women and people of color in business. Women and people of color were most likely to be placed at the head of a company when it was already at risk of failure. White men were less likely to accept leadership positions when companies were at risk of failure. And when women or people of color failed to quickly turn around the struggling company, they were most likely replaced with white men. Women and people of color are often only given the opportunity to steer the ships that white men have already rammed into icebergs. Then, when the ship sinks, the media reports that women make bad captains. When Marissa Mayer was chosen to steer Yahoo, many argued that the ship had already sunk. After years of making bad business decisions and suffering increasing irrelevancy in the ever-changing digital world, the one-time internet giant appeared to be beyond saving. And yet many celebrated Mayer's hiring as a step forward for the women in the industry, while acknowledging her chances of success were slim at best. Ellen Powell's appointment as interim CDO of Reddit surprised just about everyone, even her. But following the abrupt departure of their former CEO, the social media platform needed to change if it was going to expand beyond its reputation as a dark, smelly place for dudes to talk about video games and how mad they are that women won't give them blowjobs. If you are seeing a pattern here, that's because there is one. After everything else has been tried, everything being multiple mediocre white dudes, and time is running out. Imagine if people start saying crazy things like, what if we tried a woman? Or what if a brown person gave it a shot? Or even crazier, what if we put a brown woman in charge? Women and people of color are often seen as Hail Marys for businesses in desperate need of change. They are tossed, eyes closed, fingers crossed, across the field with little other direction than a prayer that they will land the team somewhere better than it is now. We are reading from Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America by Ijoma Oluo. Why do women and people of color take on these roles that seem doomed to failure? Are we not paying enough attention? Are we too prone to risk? Are we not smart enough to see the disaster in front of us? I think it's pretty obvious. It's because we don't think we have a choice. We are never more likely to be given an opportunity to lead than when we will probably fail. We know that we will probably be denied that chance when the company is on sure footing. So we say a prayer and risk it all in the hopes that maybe it will pay off for us and for the company. But then a funny thing happens when a woman or person of color is promoted to the head of the company. White male managers stop collaborating with their coworkers, especially their women coworkers and coworkers of color. Why do white men decrease their level of performance when a woman or person of color becomes CEO? Because suddenly they feel less connected to the company. If this fact has you thinking of the collective white male response to the presidency of Barack Obama and the rhetoric of the 2016 presidential election, yeah, I hear you. This is not all that happens when women reach the top. Often they find themselves criticized for the feminine traits that were a symbol of the change that companies wanted when they decided that change was necessary. Many journalists and tech commentators criticize Marissa Mayer's youth and fashionable wardrobe, even though Yahoo was desperate to appeal to a young, fashionable, internet-savvy audience. When she gave interviews requested by news outlets, She was critiqued by the press for seeking the limelight. Similar critiques were also aimed at Abramson. Even Meyer's voice wasn't beyond appraisal. Women who lead with a more male style do not fare any better in the Army. If you're a woman, especially if you're a small woman, and you just speak with determination, like they expect an officer to do, and especially if you use your knife hand, people will be like, oh, she's so intimidating, she's so scary. Women are often punished for the same personality traits that men are praised for. Less than a year into Abramson's role as the head of the New York Times, Dylan Byers published a scathing expose in Politico on her leadership style, titled Turbulence at the Times. The piece alleged that Abramson was widely disliked at the paper for her brusque and difficult manner. The article started by detailing an alleged confrontation between Abramson and her second in command, Dean Backwit, that ended with Backwit storming out of her office and punching a wall. This altercation was used as the first example of Abramson's apparent provocation with employees, telling Byers, if Backwit had burst out of the office in a huff, it was likely because Abramson had become unreasonable. Yet she wasn't the one who punched a wall. Unreasonable behavior by women apparently justifies violent behavior by men. Marissa Meyer faced similar critiques. She was too brusque and not collaborative enough. She was a perfectionist and a micromanager. The traits that Abramson and Meyer were criticized for are traits that make men into legends in their industries. Imagine complaining that a male editor-in-chief at a bustling newspaper is too brusque. That has literally been the stereotype of newspaper editors from the moment newspapers were invented. Who would Steve Jobs have been without his singularity, his perfectionism, his uncompromising management style, and his personal attention to detail? When women try to create the change they are hired for, they are often met with open revolt. This was the case for Ellen Pao at Reddit. Everything was a push uphill. We didn't have mobile. I was like, who doesn't believe in mobile? But the whole team didn't believe in mobile, Pao explained to me. We were discussing how she had worked to increase Reddit's mainstream appeal and the ease of use through important changes, like making the site accessible to people who want to use their cell phones for social media. As Reddit struggled to diversify its employee and user demographics, Pao started making practical changes in recruitment, hiring more women and people of color, and changing long-held practices like only recruiting from the Reddit site. She also eliminated salary negotiations, instead offering prospective employees a choice of compensation packages, since research has shown that women are often at disadvantages in salary negotiations, which can contribute to gender pay gaps. As the demographics in the office began to shift, some employees saw the changes as a threat to Reddit's culture. There was a strain of like, we only want longtime Redditors to work at Reddit, Pao told me, closed system. And those longtime Redditors were mostly white men, mostly introverted, mostly had this point of view of we can say whatever we want, we can do whatever we want, and we don't have to be inclusive, and we only like people who are like us. Reddit was the white man's domain. It can be argued that the biggest factors preventing diversification of Reddit's user base were the rampant racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and ableism found in the platform's threads. Conversations on Reddit are grouped by subject matter called subreddits. And when Pao decided to shut down the openly abusive subreddits, charmingly named Fat People Hate, Ham Planet Hatred, Shit, N-word, Say, and Trans Fags, many of the white men who visited the platform just to be able to bathe in their hatred of others were outraged. They considered themselves victimized, unfairly silenced. The closed subreddits were quickly replaced by ones with names like Ellen Pao is a cunt. And by the way, Daniela's former husband, who she married at the age of 21, who she testified against in 2021 to be kicked out of the army for white supremacy, literally, as he's describing his own radicalization, part of what happened is he got so mad when she shut down the Reddit Fat People Hate, that he decided to go from thinking about being a Bernie bro to being an absolute Trump bro, because he was so angry that his ability to just shit on people was gone. The response to Powell's attempts to change office culture, while extreme, is probably unsurprising to any women who have tried to increase equity or inclusion in their offices, especially women of color. The truth is, even though many women believe they must work to increase inclusion in their workplaces for their own survival and for the survival of their women peers, they are almost always punished for it. Women and people of color who advocate for diversity and equity are often punished for their efforts in peer, team, and management evaluations. Ironically, the people who are not penalized for their evaluations for their diversity and equity efforts are, say it with me, white men. Stop there because this goes on. Because she's wonderfully verbose. Of course, Miss Frizzle was a feminist. By the way, it is now Dr. Frizzle, because the new one is led by her cousin, and she went back to school and got a PhD. What do we have over here? YouTube likes the conversation of the internet going down. Now, I think we're going to read a chapter of Daniela's book. Ooh, this is the chapter that's published in Rolling Stone magazine. Put it down so that it looks the same. Yeah, all right. Just going to be vertical. Just going to be vertical. Okay. Pictures are going to show up. Chapter 3, According to the Will of God. This chapter is published in Rolling Stone magazine. You can check it out anytime. Petropolis, Brazil, 1993. Everybody, get dressed. Grab your flea bag. Line up by the door. I forced my eyes open and saw the blackness outside the window. That kind of darkness where I could tell it was after midnight, but I had no clue how many hours might be left until the sun would begin to rise. Ugh, I thought, another persecution drill. These had been happening more and more frequently lately, at all hours of the day and night. Usually, the uncles would pretend to be the police raiding our compounds, and the aunties would try to perfect their act of being scared while also flirting, our particular brand of bearing witness to win men over for Jesus, just like our heroine, Heaven's Girl, did in the illustrated comics. The kids would stand along the walls until we got the all clear. Then we'd return our emergency bags to their neat rows and go back to bed. If we did as we were told, we could avoid adult attention and another round of middle of the night discipline. If you're thinking this sounds like military basic training, yes. But the room felt different this time. Quieter, more on edge. My heart thumped fast in my chest as we scurried from the tops of our double and triple decker bunks, throwing on the clothes we always laid out before bed, in case of just such an emergency. The older kids were tense and silent as they squatted under the lowest bunks to pull out the flea bags stashed alphabetically. Mine was thrust into my arms, and I ran to join everybody already standing against the wall. I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself calm. This time felt real. There was no room for panic. I clutched the flea bag to me, mentally checking off the contents it contained. Toothbrush, extra t-shirt, underwear and socks, a flashlight, a small bag of peanuts and raisins, a book of baby and family photos. I needed my American passport. They told us the precious document would shield us above all else, though those were always held by the leaders, nowhere in sight. My stomach flipped as I thought about the kids in Waco, who we knew had been raided months earlier. Their compound seemed so much like ours, though the aunties and uncles insisted those Branch Davidians were nothing like us. Waco was a cult, led by a crazy man who thought he was Jesus. We were God's special soldiers. 25 children died in that raid. Their American passports hadn't helped them at all. At 6, I was becoming an expert at reading body language. It was a necessary skill to be able to gauge the moods of the adults, to know who to stay away from and when. As I held my bag in front of me, I studied Auntie Love, who normally stood still, but now paced the length of the far wall, shoulders tensed up to her ears. She kept glancing around the room, counting us, fidgeting with the strands of her waist-length red hair, tucking it behind her ears that were as freckled as the rest of her body. "Hurry up," she said again and again, her South African accent more pronounced than usual. "Get in line." I clutched Mary's hand in my own sweaty palm. At almost 4 years old, my little sister was already nearly as tall as me, with bright green eyes shaped like big almonds, and a warmer, sun-kissed tone to her skin, so different from my own translucent white complexion. We held onto each other tight as we stood ramrod straight against the wall, waiting to be counted. Persecution drills were one of the few times we were encouraged to stand next to our actual siblings. At almost any other part of the day, Mary would be separated with the younger kids. Grandpa said that being with your own siblings was a distraction, just like we weren't supposed to get too close to our parents. Being overly bonded with our siblings meant we couldn't be devoted enough to the whole family, to Grandpa, and to God. But the Systemites would never understand that. In a real raid, we needed to stay together in family groups so that we looked more normal to the police. We practiced all of the battle drills to Grandpa's precise orders. During a raid, hold the hands of the youngest children. 6 and 7-year-olds carry the infants. Look toward the cameras. Young, sad faces make the most sympathetic pictures on the news. I was 6, therefore in charge of Mary. I imagined a camera in front of me and positioned my body so it could see me while I said my lines. "I'll keep us together," I told my sister. "I'll protect you." It was what we were instructed to say, but I meant every word. Auntie Love led us as we marched in a line from the dorm, our bare feet matching the silent rhythms of the children ahead of and behind us. We quietly chanted the hymn, "Onward, Christian Soldiers," as a cadence to keep ourselves in perfect step. I had 100 questions. Did Jesus reveal to Grandpa that persecution was upon us again? Or was it worse? Were the end times starting? Was the Antichrist here? Were we all going to be martyrs soon? But I knew, for once, to keep my questions to myself. When we reached the main living room, I searched among a crowd of hundreds of adults, most in various degrees of dress, and squeezed Mary's hand when I spotted Mom. But seeing Mom protecting her belly, swollen in the last weeks of pregnancy with Uncle Zephaniah's baby, made the cloud of doom I felt hanging over the room even heavier. I heard snippets and whispers floating through the growing crowds. Raids, police, children taken. Just like Grandpa had said, I looked around the room, trying to spot if anyone was missing, to see who among us had been taken. I tried to make sense of it all, tried to process what was happening around me, but my mind raced with more questions. Will Mom have to give birth in prison? Will the evil authorities force her to submit to a Systemite doctor? Will they take our new baby? What will happen to us? Finally, the crowd parted like Moses in the Red Sea as Auntie Dora entered the room. The small, slight, and prematurely white-haired German woman made her way to the front. Everyone hushed without being asked. All eyes turned to her as she settled into her natural place at the head of the circle. Even though Auntie Dora was a woman, she was our commune leader and the unquestioned head of everything. She had lived with Grandpa, and she was even written about in the children's liturgy. The persecution is here, like we've always known, she said, and I felt the whole room take in a deep breath. Praise be to Jesus for always fulfilling his promises. And thanks to Grandpa and all of our preparations, we know what to do. A murmur of disciples praising God echoed through the room. Praise you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. You've told us this was coming. Help us to be prepared. Help us to stand up for our faith during these hardest times. I heard fear in the voices, but also something that sounded like excitement. After pausing for effect, Auntie Dora raised her voice. A brother in Argentina called. One of our homes was raided by the police. All of the children were taken away, screaming and crying and carrying the babies in their arms and the littlest ones on their backs. The adults were arrested. It's just like we've known would happen. The Lord showed our prophet, and he has prepared us. Persecution is promised in the Bible to all of God's true followers. Our children will get the opportunity to speak with the enemy at the gates, and they will defend us. They will be our deceivers yet true, but we must always be on our guard. Mary squeezed my hand, and I felt the stickiness from the sweat building between our clasped palms. I wondered how much of the doctrines she understood, if she could tell this drill was different from the others. Most of the American or foreign adults are going to be released because the Systemite police don't want an international incident. But 21 Argentinian disciples will have to stay in jail. We don't know when we'll get the children back. We don't know what will happen next. But we do know that Jesus will help us. We have faith in him. Mom bowed her head, nodding. Was she crying? Was she praying? Was she imagining what would happen when they took me and Mary? Or was she thanking Grandpa and Jesus for guiding us, for this opportunity to be tested, to prove our mettle in fire? We've received many prophecies from Jesus already, and he promises that the children will be fine. They might have to stay away from their parents for a while. They might be exposed to Systemite music and white sugar, or go to a Systemite school or an orphanage. But we won't lose faith. Jesus promises that those who believe in him can walk through fire and not get burned. The news is saying the same vile lies about us they've said before, accusing our brethren in Argentina of child abuse, calling us a cult. Gasps and sobs reverberated from all around the room. But we don't watch Satan's news, and we know the truth. Let's all pray for our brethren in Argentina. On cue, we took to our knees and bowed our heads, and I screwed my eyes shut, wondering what an orphanage would be like. Did they have books there? How did the kids get punished? Did they get to go to school? Were they allowed to sleep with panties at night? Auntie Dora's voice droned on. Thank you, Jesus. We love you, Jesus. We claim your name and the Holy Spirit, Jesus. Please protect us against these wicked Systemites who want to stop us from spreading your word. Sweet Jesus, please guard our children who are in the lion's den right now and bring them through without being harmed, like you did with Daniel in the Bible. Please bind the eyes of the evil police officers, the wicked judge, and all of our enemies. Help our children to stand strong, like we've taught them, and to love their enemies. We know that the devil can't win, and his lies will never hold, Jesus. Take these false accusations of abuse against your servants and drown them in a fiery pit, Jesus. As she prayed, I released Mary's hand and settled from my knees down onto the backs of my heels, the most comfortable position to rest during long prayer sessions. It felt like this one was going to last for a while. Burn down these claims of the wicked judge and police who swear false oaths that our children are abused, touched by our brethren's own hands, our children, our precious children, who are a heritage of you, Lord. I opened my eyes to narrow slits, even though I knew I would be in big trouble if anyone caught me peeking. I focused on Auntie Dora's husband, our commune's first man, sitting to her right. Uncle Jerry held her hand in his big, hairy one, his own eyes closed. I felt the anger rise in me, felt rage burn through my fear. How could they act so peaceful and reverent as she told such big lies? If the police knew about Uncle Jerry's punishment sessions, they'd take us away too. But I was equally convinced that in the hands of the systemites, we'd end up worse. And I was almost as afraid that I'd have to go as I was that I'd have to stay. That's one half. And by the way, every cult that I know of has some version of justified lying, which is what we see there. And it's so crazy that Rolling Stone magazine published it. Okay. Last book. Today for Devotions with Daniela, we are reading from Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, former president of Spelman College. This is a chapter called Identity Development in Adolescence, subchapter, Not at the Table. As we have seen, John felt he had to distance himself from his Black peers in order to be successful in high school. He was one of the kids not sitting at the Black table. Continued encounters with racism and access to new, culturally relevant information empowered him to give up his racelessness and become an emissary. In college, not only did he sit at the Black table, but he emerged as a campus leader, confident in the support of his Black peers. His example illustrates that one's presence at the Black table is often an expression of one's identity development, which evolves over time. Some Black students may not be developmentally ready for the Black table in middle school or high school. They may not yet have had their own encounters with racism, and race may not be very salient for them. Just as we don't reach puberty and begin developing sexual interest at the same time, racial, ethnic, cultural group identity development unfolds in idiosyncratic ways. Though my research suggests that early adolescence is a common time for Black students to begin actively identifying with their racial, ethnic, cultural group, one's own life experiences are also important determinants of the timing. Young people whose racial identity development is out of sync with their peers often feel in an awkward position. Adolescents are notoriously egocentric and assume that their experience is the same as everyone else's. Just as girls who become interested in boys become disdainful of their friends still interested in dolls, the Black teens who are at the table can be quite judgmental toward those who are not. If I think it's a sign of authentic Blackness to sit at this table, then you should too. The young Black men and women who still hang around with the white classmates they may have known since early childhood may be snubbed by their Black peers. This dynamic is particularly apparent in regional schools where children from a variety of neighborhoods are brought together. When Black children from predominantly white neighborhoods go to school with Black children from predominantly Black neighborhoods, the former group are often viewed as trying to be white by the latter. We all speak the language of the streets we live on. Black children living in white neighborhoods often sound white to their Black peers from across town and may be teased because of it. This can be a very painful experience, particularly when the young person is not fully accepted as part of the white peer group either. One young Black woman from a predominantly white community described exactly this situation in an interview. In a school with a lot of racial tension, Terry felt that the worst thing that happened was the rejection she experienced from the other Black children who were being bused to her school. Though she wanted to be friends with them, they teased her, calling her an Oreo cookie, and sometimes beating her up. The only close Black friend Terry had was a biracial girl from her neighborhood. Racial tensions also affected her relationship with white students. One white friend's parents commented, "I can't believe you're Black. You don't seem like all the Black children. You're nice." Though other parents made similar comments, Terry reported that her white friends didn't start making them until junior high school, when Terry's Blackness became something to be explained. One friend introduced Terry to another white girl by saying, "She's not really Black. She just went to Florida and got a really dark tan." A white 6th grade boyfriend became embarrassed when his friends discovered he had a crush on a Black girl. He stopped telling Terry how pretty she was and instead called her N-word and said, "Your lips are too big. I don't want to see you. I won't be your friend anymore." Despite supportive parents who expressed concern about her situation, Terry said she was a very depressed child. Her father would have conversations with her about being Black and beautiful and about the union of people of color that had always existed that I needed to find, and the pride. However, her parents did not have a network of Black friends to help support her. It was the intervention of a Black junior high school teacher that Terry feels helped her the most. Mrs. Campbell really exposed me to the good Black community because I was so down on it. By getting Terry involved in singing gospel music and introducing her to other Black students who would accept her. That's when I started having other Black friends, and I thank her a lot for that. The significant role that Mrs. Campbell played in helping Terry open up illustrates the constructive potential that informed adults can have in the identity development process. She recognized Terry's need for a same-race peer group and helped her find one. Talking to groups of Black students about the variety of living situations Black people come from and the unique situation facing Black adolescents in white communities helps to expand the definition of what it means to be Black and increases intra-group acceptance at a time when that is quite important. For children in Terry's situation, it is also helpful for Black parents to provide ongoing opportunities for their children to connect with other Black peers, even if that means traveling outside the community they live in. Race-conscious parents often do this by seeking out a historically Black church to attend or by maintaining ties to Black social organizations such as Jack and Jill. Parents who make this effort often find that their children become bicultural, able to move comfortably between Black and white communities, and able to sit at the Black table when they are ready. Implied in this discussion is the assumption that connecting with one's Black peers in the process of identity development is important and should be encouraged. For young Black people living in predominantly Black communities, such connections occur spontaneously with neighbors and classmates and usually do not require special encouragement. However, for young people in predominantly white communities, they may only occur with active parental intervention. One might wonder if this social connection is really necessary. If a young person has found a niche within a circle of white friends, is it really necessary to establish a Black peer group as a reference point? Maybe not, but it certainly helps. As one's awareness of the daily challenges of living in a racist society increases, it's immediately beneficial to be able to share one's experiences with others who have lived them. Even when white friends are willing and able to listen and bear witness to one's struggle, they cannot really share the experience. One young woman came to this realization in her senior year of high school. The isolation never really bothered me until about senior year when I was the only one in the class. That little burden, that constant burden of you always having to strive to do your best and show that you can do just as much as everybody else. Your white friends can't understand that, and it's really hard to communicate to them. Only someone else of the same racial, same ethnic background would understand something like that. When one is faced with what Chester Pierce calls the mundane, extreme environmental stress of racism in adolescence or adulthood, The ability to see oneself as part of a larger group from which one can draw support is an important coping strategy. Individuals who do not have such a strategy available to them because they do not experience a shared identity with at least some subset of their racial group are at risk for considerable social isolation and depression. Of course, who we perceive as sharing our identity may be influenced by other dimensions of identity, such as gender, sexual orientation, social class, geographic location, skin color, or ethnicity. For example, research indicates that first-generation Black immigrants from the Caribbean tend to emphasize their national origins and ethnic identities, distancing themselves from U.S. Blacks, due in part to their belief that West Indians are viewed more positively by whites than those American Blacks whose family include the experience of U.S. slavery. To relinquish one's ethnic identity as West Indian and take on an African American identity may be understood as downward social mobility. Also, immigrants from the Caribbean, as well as those from African countries, are from social contexts in which they were in the numerical majority, and Blacks occupied positions of power, a legacy of European colonialism notwithstanding. Thus, the racial socialization for African and Afro-Caribbean immigrants may be significantly different from that of American-born Blacks. Second-generation Black immigrants, however, without an identifiable accent to mark them as foreigners, may lose the relative ethnic privilege their parents experienced. In that context, they may be more likely to seek racial solidarity with Black American peers in the face of encounters with racism. Whether it is the experience of being followed in stores because they are suspected of shoplifting, seeing people respond to them with fear on the street, or feeling overlooked in school, Black youth can benefit from seeking support from those who have had similar experiences. Check out Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. One last thing that I wanted to show, but now I've done forgot. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to make a video of because I always forget to make my before videos. Okay. Finally remembering to make a before video. So I have this bracelet that's from Brazil. The state that I grew up in is called Minas Gerais, General Mines, and it's from where like 90% of the world's semi-precious gemstones come from. So this is amethyst and some white quartz, it looks like. Anyways, the connector here piece broke, and I have this purple, so this is the beginning of something fun. Stay tuned. Remember those pressures? Yeah, like I drop into high school just out of a cult, right? And coming from Mexico, coming to like Texas, inner city school. I mean, this is the time I've been the most exposed to other races in the US. And I remember I took a class on African American history, and I remember that the professor made us draw out a diagram of like where everyone hung out at lunch, and we could all do it. We could all be like, this is the jocks, this is the Black kids, this is the blah blah blah. He had a whole exercise about it. I don't remember what like some of it was for, but it was interesting. We definitely all knew. Beaded. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's amber, which Jasper I think is the same thing, right? Kenyan amber. My husband did a study abroad, which I'm pretty sure was just a Mormon mission trip disguised. He's out there building a dam, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, why is this bothering me so much? And I'm like, oh, it's 1,000% white savioring, and it just looks like things we would have done in the Children of God to get good pictures to then go raise money. Anyways, he got invited back for 8 weeks this summer, and he said no. All right, friends. that is today's devotions, and I will see you back again tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's the bracelet. I only showed it to one camera. It's the bracelet. This like crisscross beaded thing. I still need to learn how to do this. This is in so much Brazilian jewelry. And then I have this purple. So I think I'm just going to like stitch into it and make it wider and put it together with snaps like I always do with my stuff. And if any of you are interested in custom jewelry, I make them. You can also make me an offer at anything I'm wearing. This one is definitely going for $100 because this one has like special stuff on it. But usually I sell my collars for $75 and my cuffs for $40. And all of that can be found on my Etsy shop. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and all the wonderful questions. And I will be back tomorrow. Justified lying and moral injury. Yes. Yes. You are so right about that. And I think that like when we get out of the cult, you know, we've lost our whole framework, but we were taught that like some versions of lies were okay. I honestly think we're just like trash people for a little while we're trying to rebuild our entire moral framework. And a lot of us will be like, am I a psychopath? Like my ability to lie and act is second only to none. There's a reason why we produced Rose McGowan and Joaquin Phoenix. But yeah, I do think I was never a psychopath. I was just needing to establish a new moral framework. And also military, lots of moral injury and justified lying too, you know, so I get double bunches of that. All right. See you all later.